All right, welcome back. This is the start of the lecture for Unit 2 for the Design 1 class, and we're going to be talking about lines. Lines. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is there are three main types of lines. So I want you to kind of think about what those three main types of lines are. Does anyone have a guess as to what they might be? Okay.
There's squiggly and
Okay.
doodly types
Okay.
of lines.
Sure. So let's do that. So like squiggly or very irregular lines versus really regular lines like straight lines. But all of these, as irregular as it is or straight, they are all actual lines. Okay? There are, in artwork, there are two other places we see lines other than actual lines, meaning places where someone actually made a mark that is a line in the artwork.
So would the other one be implied lines?
Very good. All right, implied lines. Now, can we think about how to make some implied lines?
Could it be like shadows and highlights and such?
Okay, but let's think more abstract without representation, without pictures of stuff. Like if we were just using marks or shapes.
Is it the same thing as like negative space? Like you make a line by making
You could.
something on each side of the line?
Okay, that's a good point. Here's an example. Just using actual lines, we can make.
A bunch of other.
Wait. We can make an implied line created by a negative space. Do you see that? Do you see this line right here?
Yes.
The negative space between the two sets of implied lines? Okay, so that's one way we can make, right, an implied line, right? So that's one type of implied line. Can we think of any other kinds of implied lines? There's a pretty obvious one that could, is actually the exact opposite of what we just did, right? Like the most simple example of an implied line is a dotted line,
Oh.
right? Any type of grouping where, let's say, you could have a bunch of circles
In a line.
in a line,
Okay.
right? Or any number of things in a line, right? Create an implied line. So we have a negative space implied line. We have a positive grouping, and that could be a grouping of lines. Like I can make a bunch of lines, of actual lines, but then the actual lines in a row create an implied line, or it could be a bunch of shapes, right? Or a bunch of dots, okay?
Yeah.
And in artwork, it can happen in a lot of different ways. There's one other major type of implied line that can happen in a work of art. Think about this. If you looked at a painting, right? Like let's say a Renaissance painting, and there was Jesus in the painting, and somewhere else there was baby John the Baptist, and baby John the Baptist would be going like
If
that.
he was pointing at something.
Right. But does pointing have to be something that's done by a person? Right? Like in a work of art, we made a composition, and let's say we're only using actual lines, but we're going to create an implied line. So I make this section right here, up there, just out of a collection of some lines, and then down here, I made these collections of lines, right?
They're implying.
Do you see the implied line that,
To go
right,
up.
it's not just them, but all the way to there, because they're pointing to some point of focus. There's an implied line going from them to there.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so that's,
Does that have a special name besides implied line?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't think so. I don't think it matters, but I think it's important to really explore all the different ways that you can create implied lines. Okay, so we've covered actual lines and implied lines. There is one other type of line that exists in works of art all the time that most of the time people completely don't notice whatsoever.
Apparently, because I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
This is a type of line that is created without line, without any, right? Trying to think if I can,
Created without any mark?
hold on a second. Just keep the camera on there. I'm gonna do a little.
Keep rolling.
Keep rolling, Lyndon.
This is awesome.
Cinema verite.
Okay, here we go. All right. we're going to make an implied line. Or not implied line, we're going to make a new kind of line.
Are you going to tell us what it's called at some point?
Yeah, I'll give you a word for it.
All right.
Is it the way of cutting something in half to make a ridge kind of shape?
Right. Well, okay. We look at a shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
The edge of any shape, right? We
Is a
call that a
line.
contour, right?
Oh.
Oh, contour lines. Duh.
Right. Okay.
He was actually
But
talking to me about that.
but contour lines are drawings where you draw the contour. But we can have a contour without a line. There's no actual line there, right? There's no line there.
No
This
line
is
there.
just a shape, but it still creates a line because of the edge of that shape.
Okay.
Right? So the other way that we have lines in artwork is through contour, the edge of shapes.
There was no actual mark made to delineate that line.
Right. The line just exists because here, in one part side of that line, all the color and all the value is this, and on the other side, all the color and all the value is that. Okay, so first of all, those are the three kinds of lines that we have in artwork. We have actual lines, implied lines, and contours. And even oftentimes in artwork, you can see the use of contour and implied lines goes hand in hand. That like when you're creating an implied line in a work of art, often it's like one contour of one shape, then leading to a pointing device, then leading to another contour of another shape, leading your eye from one place to another.
And I noticed you're not calling that contour line. Is that because you didn't make a mark? You're just calling it
Correct.
contour.
Generally, when we're talking about contour lines, we're talking about drawings that people make observing contours.
Okay.
Right, which is a different thing. Okay, so next thing, so far we've covered kinds of lines, right? The three main kinds of lines. Next thing we need to talk about is how do lines create value? How do lines create value? Okay, anyone have any ideas?
You can. Wait, what's the word? Make them thicker, thinner?
Very good. Okay, so the width of a line, right? And let's see if we got a tool that can work very well for that point, right? That like you can make a line of the same value or even, right? Like technically that's not as dark as that, right? It's not as
No.
saturated a mark, but because it's wider, it creates a sense of more value, right? So we've got width of mark can create value. All right, what else?
Could you also create value by shading, like going like from a darker?
Yeah,
to
but
a
we want
lighter?
to just talk about no tone. We only want to talk about line, right? How just with line.
Thickness of mark?
Very good, right? Like what we call line weight, right? The amount of pressure that you put on a line, right? So if you were drawing a line,
You can make it darker.
it could get darker or lighter, right? Depending on how much weight you put on. Now, what happens?
Almost like a snake.
It does. What happens with a lot of marks when you do that is the line also gets thicker while you're doing it, but it also gets darker, right? Okay, so we can call that line weight. Okay, what else? What's another way that lines make marks?
There's line weight.
There's a
With
pretty,
mark.
there's a pretty simple difference, right? That sometimes people don't think about, which is this.
Oh, the timer is stopped.
Okay. All right, we're going to have to end here, then we'll come back to cover a few more points. All right, thank you.